I'm Chris Shapiro, and this is Retropulse Music, and joining me on the show today is a multi-talented musician. She is a singer, she's a songwriter, guitarist, a member of the Bangles. She's sung lead on some of the most internationally successful songs of the 80s, such as Manic Monday, Walk Like an Egyptian, Eternal Flame, and she's here today to talk about her new solo album, Someday. Please welcome the very talented Miss Susanna Hoffs. Susanna, how are you?
I'm doing well. How are you, Chris?
I'm fabulous. Now,
Good.
when I first listened to Someday, the entire album, it struck me as an album that was created by an artist, because there are so many albums out there today and so many songs that really lack true artistic expression, and they are nothing more than what they're at face value. But this isn't one of those albums. Here you really express yourself musically, which I think a musician should always do. But my question is how did you know it was the right time to go back into the studio and create this work of art?
Oh, God, thank you so much for everything you just said about the record. I really appreciate it. It just sort of was a series of events that kind of lined up in just the right way to open up this window of time, and all these songs flowed out. I really have to credit meeting a kid from Nashville. I call him a kid because he's a lot younger than me. When he came out to LA, he was in his mid-20s, a friend of my niece who had just moved out to LA. His name is Andrew Brazel, and my whole family, we kind of adopted him when we met him. He was just looking to start a life as a musician in LA, and the weekend he came to visit, I happened to be doing a show on the Lilith Fair tour with the Bangles up in the Bay Area. I invited him to come along. My niece was selling T-shirts anyway at the show, so they both came up there. He got a chance to see what was going on back in Bangles world, and then he ended up moving to LA, and he needed a place to stay. So I just my heart went out to him because he kind of showed up with basically a guitar and a suitcase full of cool effects pedals for his guitar, and he didn't have a lot of money, so I said, stay in my guest room. Well, I never realized that the fact that he was ensconced in the household would lead to us writing all these songs. But between Bangles and kind of working mom mode and taking care of the family, my songwriting kept being backburnered, and I don't know, it just was hard to find the time for it. But having someone in the house, it was kind of like songwriting camp. Every night, we just started writing these songs, and I think you're right. They are very much personal reflections about my life, and really kind of come from the deep voice, place, which is always what you hope for when you sit down and are staring at a blank piece of paper and there's nothing there. Sort of, how do you tap into it? Well, having Andrew Brazel around kind of helped open that up, because he was kind of not only able to observe my life, but he was sort of living in the middle of it. So it was really sort of the perfect storm of having all this circumstance add up to us being able to sit consistently down together in the living room and work on songs.
Now, was there any song that was sort of instantaneous where you just picked up the guitar one night and the guitar kind of spoke through you? Or I kind of call it like unlocking the secrets within the instrument, where the song's just kind of, it's born right there in that moment. Did that ever happen for you guys?
It happened a lot. And a lot of the songwriting just kind of flowed out in the way you're describing. I think I remember the night that we wrote True, which is the last song on the record, that we just sat down together and we just started playing, and I just started to feel like we were tapping into something really interesting and really melodic. And one of my goals going in writing, well, it's always been the same goal, but it's always the driving force, is to kind of come up with something that not only is about something real and emotional and personal, but also at the same time has a kind of a melody in it that as to the singer, the person who grew up singing along to records in the 60s and loving that music to this day, that would be as fun to sing as some of those songs that I loved as a child. And that song just kind of came out, and it had so much melody, and the melodies were just flowing out without, I don't know where they come from. It's just sometimes you get lucky, and something about the idea in the song informs the melody, and then the melody goes back and informs the lyric, and it just all kind of comes together, and that was one of those ones.
And what I love about this album is all the songs are very upbeat and they're very organic in their nature, in that it seems like it was a band in the studio recording their songs and that there wasn't a heavy dependence on, post-production or computer-generated sounds, for lack of a better phrase. And I was reading that the way that you recorded this was you were actually in the studio with the band, you had your microphone in there, and you guys sort of recorded it as one session, one big group, and sort of in the spirit of the 1960s, how they would record. And I was wondering if that was a new approach for you in recording, or if that's something that you've always done along the line.
Well, it was new, because over the years, I think with just the technology and even just not having the ability to kind of put together formal sessions like that where everybody's in the same room at the same time, it was very exciting. And I think it was Mitchell's idea to do it that way. He'd had a lot of luck, just, given the fact that there's not a lot of money flowing to artists to support these efforts. We kind of have to just self-finance these things, and that was definitely the case for me. He said, you can piece it together, but there's something that happens when you have the energy of people showing up with the task at hand to create something really great in a short amount of time, hopefully. And that was really exciting to me. I had just finished reading the Keith Richards memoir, and he talked so much about that. He talked so much about, Keith did, about just, it's kind of my favorite thing about music, too. You're in a room, and people are making these noise, this sound out of their instruments, and it's kind of the way that all the sounds bleed together, and the energy of people in a room together recording, it's just, or performing, it's kind of a magical alchemy that happens when just these sounds are all bouncing off of each other, and that sounded pretty damn exciting to me, to kind of go back to this very old school way of doing it. So I wanted to step up to the plate, and have to go for broke. I mean, that was the energy of it, and it was kind of a thrill.
And I think it creates some really true music. There isn't a lot of production in it. It's true artists playing. And you mentioned your producer, Mitchell. How did he get involved? Because I was reading that he actually played the keyboard riff on Manic Monday back in the 80s. Yeah. So how did he come on board?
Well, we were neighbors, so we run into each other a lot, just living in the same little area in West Los Angeles. But I happened to be out with Brazel one night. We went to see a friend of his, Caitlin Rose, who's a wonderful singer-songwriter from Nashville, and a peer of Brazel's. They've kind of worked together over the years a little bit here and there. And she was playing opening for Ron Sexsmith, who's an amazing artist, at Largo. And it's a great venue for seeing music. And I'd performed there with Matthew Sweet not so long ago, and we did a show with Fred Armisen. There's often a lot of really interesting events going on at Largo where there's, comedians interacting with musicians, and it's just a great place. But anyway, so we went to Largo to see Caitlin Rose open for Ron Sexsmith, and Mitchell was there because he was there to see Ron, who he had worked with numerous times, made different records with. In fact, they just made another record recently. So I just ran into Mitchell there, standing in line to get something to eat, and I just started telling him how excited I was about these new songs I had written, and I guess there was something genuine in my voice, that kind of excitement he hadn't seen or heard from me in a while, and he said, wow, I'd love to hear them, which I assumed was just the polite thing to say in response to somebody gushing about their new stuff, but he really did want to hear it, and he called me up, and I didn't have any demos, so I just said, is it okay if Brazel and I just come down and play this material for you on a couple of guitars? He said, yeah. So I went over to his house and performed the songs, and a couple days later, Mitchell called and said, let's do a record. So that's kind of how it came together. And then at that point, we had 5 or 6 songs, but we didn't have a whole album, so we actually were forced to go and, which was good, a good kind of pressure, and write a bunch more songs, which we did, and then that was the album. So it was really in a concentrated period of creativity that it all kind of was born out of.
Yeah, and sometimes that's the best because you're focused on your goal and you know what you want to get out of your music, and you don't have time to double guess yourself. You trust your instincts.
Yeah, it really was. It really was a very concentrated time period because I had to kind of grab that time between Bangles tours, and I'm just so happy all the stars kind of aligned in the right way, and I met this unbelievably talented songwriting partner in Brazil who came out here. Nobody calls him Andrew, by the way, so we call him Brazil, which I know is so confusing to people, but that's his last name. And anyway, and then just the two of us running into Mitchell. And there was another night that I went out to see another friend of Brazil's, this woman named Tristan, another singer-songwriter from Nashville, and that's the night that I ran into Benmont Tench from Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers, and that kind of moment of seeing Benmont made me think about this song that I had written with Mike Campbell from Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers years before, that I'd always really loved the song and wanted to do something with it. And so that song was rewritten kind of to bring it up to date and ended up on the record too. And that was called, that song's called Raining. And it's a song I'm really proud of, and so happy that all these weird encounters that kind of led up to just the record coming to life and being what it is.
That's very cool. Now, and I have read about the Raining, and I think that is an awesome song. And I was wondering, how did you guys team up with, or how did you team up with Mike Campbell back? I was reading that it was like in 1989 when you were still with the Bangles. Was it at a concert, or how did you guys decide that, hey, we can...
Kind of met them just being on the LA scene as musicians during the whole 80s period a couple of times. But Mike actually reached out to me to write together, and the Bangles had done some background vocals on a song with Tom Petty, and I think, I can't remember if it was then that Mike reached out and said, hey, you want to write together? And of course, I was so flattered, and then we did, and it was a lot of fun, and we recorded. We worked on the song at but by the way, the song that the Bangles had sung on with Tom Petty was "Waiting for Tonight," and I think it's been re-released or released maybe for the first time on a box set that came out not too long ago. But anyway, so yeah, that was a real honor to work with Mike Campbell. So I'm really glad the song ended up being released on a record.
Now, when you pulled it off the shelf, did you contact Mike at all and say, hey, I'm working on this song we worked on 20 years ago.
Yeah.
Do you want to come on board and help out?
Well, I did reach out to him, and it had been so long. I sent him. I took the cassette that I had, and I had to go to Radio Shack and get a little cord to somehow figure out how to digitize the music, which I did. And so Benmont gave me Mike's phone number, and I called him. And I told him, and he said, well, God, I don't think I have a copy of it anywhere. So I did send him this digital version of it just over email. And he said, he's the one who said, feel free to go and rework it because, maybe do a revamp of the lyrics. So we just kind of overhauled the song and came up with a kind of a different groove on it and a different, Brazil and I rewrote it, and I then sent it to him, and he was so happy with it, so that made me happy.
Since you've just gone through the recording process, and everything from songwriting to recording, what have you learned about yourself, or about music in general as a result?
Wow. Well, I've learned the same old thing that I probably already knew, that I just love. I love making music, and it's exciting to make new music. Really exciting, and I learned that I really enjoy writing songs. I think the partnership with Brazil was just kind of I'm so lucky that worked out the way that it did, and we just, for whatever reason, have a real ease in writing songs together. So the 60s has always been a reference point for me. It's when I fell in love with music the first time. I'm sort of never gotten over that first musical crush, and I still go to that era for, I don't know, it's still like, you know how music can be sort of like a companion throughout your life? Well, that's been the case for me. It's also kind of interesting to see how a lot of 60s influences is kind of coming up in the indie music world and the more alternative music world. I get kind of turned on to bands from my kids now that they're into, and it's so fun for me to hear a lot of the same influences coming through that, coming out in that scene. Even people who didn't experience the 60s, they weren't born yet, so they didn't have a first-hand experience of it, but, it's cool.
And Susanna, we are running out of time, but I want to thank you again for being on the show, and I'm looking forward to the new material that you guys have coming out. Thank you again. I'm definitely going to share someday with all my friends. So
thank you.
Thanks again.
Really appreciate it. Thanks so much.